The laughter around our dining room table felt like broken glass scraping against my eardrums. Friday night, game night with our usual crowd, Monica from Lila's office, Evan the golden boy, and the Hendersons from down the hall. Everyone was 3 drinks deep into cheap wine and cheaper conversation when my wife decided to twist the knife. "If I could turn back time," Lila announced, her voice carrying that particular brand of cruelty she'd perfected over our 7-year marriage, "I'd never marry Garrett." She gestured toward me with her wine glass, sloshing Merlot dangerously close to the white tablecloth. "Can you imagine? All those wasted years." The room erupted in uncomfortable chuckles. Monica covered her mouth, pretending shock while her eyes gleamed with gossip-hungry delight. Evan, tall, handsome, perfectly pressed Evan, smirked like he was in on some private joke. The Hendersons shifted in their chairs, suddenly fascinated by their cards. I set down my own glass with deliberate care, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. The moment stretched like a rubber band about to snap. 7 years of marriage, 3 years of growing suspicion, and 1 month of careful planning had led to this exact instant. "Finally," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Something we agree on." I reached into my jacket pocket, the same jacket Lila had mocked earlier for being too casual for company, and pulled out a manila envelope. The paper crinkled in the sudden silence as I placed it on the table between the scattered playing cards and wine-stained napkins. "Garrett, what are you—" Lila started, but I held up a hand. "Since we're sharing regrets," I continued, opening the envelope with theatrical slowness, "I thought you might want to see mine." I spread the contents across the table like a dealer laying out a winning hand. Screenshots of text messages, printed emails, photos taken from a distance but clear enough to make their point. Lila's face went white as fresh snow. Evan's smirk melted like ice cream in August. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. "My biggest regret," I said, picking up one particular screenshot, "was trusting my wife when she said those late nights at the office were about work." I held up the image, a text from Lila to Evan that made Monica gasp audibly. Turns out she was working, just not on what I thought. The Henderson woman clutched her husband's arm. Monica's mouth hung open like a fish gasping for air. Evan pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against hardwood. "This is insane," he stammered. "Garrett, you can't just what?" I interrupted. "Show everyone what kind of man my wife's been spending her evenings with? The kind who sends pictures of himself to married women? The kind who calls other men's wives at midnight to whisper sweet promises?" Lila finally found her voice. "You went through my phone? You violated my privacy." I laughed, a sound that surprised even me with its genuine amusement. "Privacy? You left it unlocked on the kitchen counter, sweetheart, right next to the grocery list that included special dinner for E." The room felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Monica was already reaching for her purse, probably calculating how fast she could spread this story through their office. The Hendersons looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. Evan kept glancing toward the door as if measuring the distance, but I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. "That's just the warm-up act," I announced, gathering the papers back into a neat stack. "You'll want to stick around for the main event." 3 hours later, after our guests had fled like rats from a sinking ship, I sat alone in my study while Lila stormed around the house, alternating between tears and rage. The silence between her outbursts gave me time to remember how this all started, how a simple suspicion had unraveled into something much bigger and darker than I'd ever imagined. It began with the phone calls, late nights when Lila would step onto the balcony, speaking in hushed tones about project deadlines and client emergencies. Her PR firm was demanding, sure, but since when did marketing campaigns require midnight strategy sessions? Then came the wardrobe changes. New lingerie appeared in our laundry, lacy, expensive things I'd never seen her wear. When I asked about a particularly revealing black number, she claimed it was for confidence at work presentations. Right. Because nothing says professional like a push-up bra that could double as architecture. The real breakthrough came 3 weeks ago at Murphy's Tavern, the dive bar down by the marina, where I'd been drowning my suspicions in cheap whiskey. Jules, the owner, had been polishing glasses when he mentioned seeing Lila's car parked outside the Ocean View Apartments, the complex where several of her co-workers lived. Thought it was strange, Jules had said, his weathered face creasing with concern. 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, none of my business, but it became my business fast. The next day, I called in a favor from Cap Pritchard, my old friend from the docks who'd gone into private investigation after leaving the police force. Cap had the patience and skills I lacked, the ability to watch and wait without letting emotion cloud his judgment. "You sure you want to know?" Cap had asked when I hired him. Sometimes ignorance is easier to live with. I was sure, or thought I was, until the evidence started piling up. Photos of Lila and Evan having coffee at a cafe 20 miles outside town. Credit card receipts from hotels I'd never heard of. Phone records showing dozens of calls between them, always when I was at work managing the marina's daily operations. But the real gut punch came when Cap discovered the second phone. Lila had been clever, almost clever enough. She'd hidden a prepaid cell in her gym bag, using it for communications she didn't want traced to her regular number. Cap had followed her to the electronics store where she bought minutes, watched her activate it in her car. Getting access to that phone required patience. I waited until she left it charging in her car during a yoga class, then used the locksmith skills I'd learned during my brief stint as a security guard in college. 15 minutes was all I needed to photograph every message, every photo, every voice memo stored on that device. What I found made my stomach turn. Not just the affair, that was almost expected by then, but the contempt. The casual cruelty with which they discussed me, their plans to humiliate me, their schemes to push me out of the picture entirely. One voice memo in particular stood out, recorded just a week earlier. Lila's voice, breathy with excitement. "He has no idea how pathetic he looks, thinking he's some kind of tough guy because he works at the marina. Evan, when we're together, I want to make sure he knows exactly what he lost." Evan's response, smug and satisfied. "Don't worry, baby. By the time we're done, he'll be begging you to take him back, and then you can laugh in his face." They'd underestimated me. Badly. They saw a simple dock worker, a man who spent his days managing boat slips and dealing with weekend sailors. They missed the investigative instincts I'd honed during my years as a journalist before the newspaper industry collapsed. They ignored the network of contacts I'd built in this small coastal town, the favors owed and friendships earned through a decade of honest work. Most importantly, they forgot that underestimating your opponent is the fastest way to lose any game. Now, listening to Lila slam doors and make phone calls to Monica, probably trying to control the narrative, I pulled out the real evidence, the stuff I hadn't shown our dinner guests, the material that would turn this from a simple affair into something much more devastating. Bank statements showing Lila had been siphoning money from our joint account to pay for hotel rooms and gifts for Evan. Email exchanges between her and Monica discussing how to sabotage my reputation at the marina by spreading rumors about my work performance. Text messages planning to frame me for harassment at Lila's company, complete with fake evidence and coached witnesses. They'd wanted to destroy me systematically, professionally and personally, turn me into the villain in their love story, make me the obstacle that justified their betrayal. Instead, they'd handed me everything I needed to destroy them first. My phone buzzed, a text from Cap. "Package delivered. Phase 2 is ready when you are." I smiled for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow was Saturday, which meant Lila would try to go to work to manage the crisis. Except her car wouldn't start, and when she called for help, She'd discover that her credit cards had been frozen pending investigation of suspicious charges, and when she finally made it to the office, she'd find that someone had already been there ahead of her. The game was just beginning. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, perfect weather for what I had planned. Lila discovered her car trouble at 7 a.m., her frustrated curses echoing through our underground parking garage as she turned the key to nothing but clicking sounds. I watched from our bedroom window, sipping coffee and admiring Cap's handiwork. Removing a distributor cap was old-school sabotage, the kind of thing that looked like random mechanical failure. By 8:30, she'd arranged a ride with Monica and was heading to Hartwell & Associates, the PR firm where she'd worked her way up to senior account manager through a combination of genuine talent and ruthless ambition. What she didn't know was that I'd already been there. The security guard, Tommy Reeves, owed me a favor from last summer when I'd helped his son get a job at the marina. Tommy had let me into the building at 6 a.m., officially to deliver a forgotten flash drive to Lila's boss, Margaret Atwood. In reality, I was there to plant evidence that would destroy my wife's career as thoroughly as she'd planned to destroy mine. The flash drive contained more than just proof of Lila's affair. Thanks to Cap's investigation and some careful social engineering, I'd uncovered something much more damaging. Lila had been stealing ideas from her colleagues and presenting them as her own work. The promotion she'd received 6 months ago, the one that came with late nights and increased travel, built on Monica's research and another co-worker's marketing concepts. The beautiful irony was that Monica had been helping Lila cover up the affair while being completely unaware that her own work was being plagiarized. When she found out, and she would find out, the betrayal would cut both ways. I'd also included evidence of Lila's expense account fraud, her use of company resources for personal business, and her violation of the firm's ethics policy regarding relationships with clients. Evan worked for one of Hartwell's biggest accounts, making their affair not just personal misconduct, but a professional conflict of interest. By 9 a.m., I was back home, waiting for the fireworks to begin. The first explosion came at 10:15. Lila called, her voice shaking with rage and panic. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Margaret wants to see me immediately. Someone sent her information about your creative borrowing from Monica?" I interrupted. "Or about your creative accounting with the expense reports? I'm curious which one she's more upset about." "You bastard! You can't prove any of that." "Actually, I can. Turns out Monica keeps very detailed records of her work. Timestamps, email drafts, research notes. She's quite meticulous. I'm sure she'll be fascinated to learn where her ideas ended up." The line went quiet except for Lila's ragged breathing. "You're destroying my career," she whispered. "No," I replied, my voice steady as granite. "You destroyed your career the moment you decided to betray everyone who trusted you. I'm just making sure the right people know about it." She hung up. 20 minutes later, Monica called. "Garrett, I need to talk to you," Monica said, her usual gossipy enthusiasm replaced by something harder, more calculating. "About Lila. About everything." We met at Murphy's Tavern, the kind of place where Lila would never think to look for either of us. Monica arrived looking like she'd been crying, her carefully applied makeup smudged around red-rimmed eyes. "She stole from me," Monica said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from me. 3 years of work, the Oceanside Resort campaign, the Harbor Festival promotion, even the tagline for the new waterfront development. All mine, all credited to her. I nodded sympathetically while Jules brought us coffee. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." "Are you?" Monica's eyes sharpened. "Or did you plan this exactly? Does it matter? You deserve to know the truth." She stirred her coffee slowly, thinking. "There's more, isn't there? This isn't just about the plagiarism." "What do you think?" Monica leaned forward. "I think my best friend has been lying to me about everything. I think she's been using me to cover for her affair while stealing my work and planning to throw me under the bus when it suited her. I think you're offering me a chance to get even." Smart woman. No wonder Lila had targeted her work. What I'm offering, I said carefully, is the truth. What you do with it is your choice. Monica pulled out her phone and showed me a text from Lila. Emergency meeting with Margaret went badly. Need you to back up my story about the Henderson account. Say we worked on it together at your place last Tuesday. Last Tuesday, Monica said. She was with Evan at the Seaside Inn. I know because I covered for her with a client call. She wanted me to lie then, and she wants me to lie now. Will you? Monica's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Not a chance. In fact, I think it's time Margaret heard the whole truth about Lila's work habits and her after-work activities. By noon, Lila's career was in free fall. Margaret Atwood had suspended her pending a full investigation. Monica had provided a detailed account of the plagiarism, complete with documentation. 2 other colleagues, emboldened by Monica's revelation, came forward with their own stories of stolen ideas and manipulated credit. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The evening's entertainment was scheduled for the town's annual Harbor Festival, a celebration that drew hundreds of locals to the waterfront boardwalk. Lila would be there. She never missed a social event where she could network and show off. Evan would probably accompany her, playing the supportive colleague while secretly gloating over my humiliation. They expected me to hide, to slink away in shame while they paraded their relationship in front of the whole town. Instead, I was going to give everyone a show they'd never forget. Cap met me at the marina as the sun set behind the harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He handed me a manila envelope thick with photographs and documents. Everything you asked for, he said. Evan's employment records, his previous harassment complaints, his financial troubles. The man's not as golden as he pretends to be. I flipped through the contents, whistling softly. 3 different women filed complaints against him at his last job, and he owes $30,000 in credit card debt. Gets better. Turns out he's been skimming from his expense account, too. Different methods than your wife, but same result. I've got documentation going back 18 months. And his transfer to the Henderson account? Cap grinned. Effective Monday. Seems someone anonymously tipped off HR about his questionable conduct with female colleagues. They're moving him to the industrial waste management account, not exactly the glamorous client list he's used to. Perfect. By Monday, Evan would be explaining septic systems and garbage collection to potential clients instead of wooing restaurant owners and hotel managers. His career trajectory was about to take a sharp turn downward. One more thing, Cap said, pulling out a small recording device. Your wife and her boyfriend had a very interesting conversation this afternoon. Seems they're planning to confront you tonight at the festival. Make a big public scene about how you've been stalking and harassing them. I listened to the recording, my anger crystallizing into something cold and focused. They wanted a public confrontation? They were about to get one, just not the kind they expected. The Harbor Festival was in full swing by the time I arrived, the boardwalk crowded with families enjoying carnival rides, street food, and live music. I spotted Lila immediately. She was hard to miss in her red dress and designer heels, clearly overdressed for a small-town festival. Evan stood beside her, playing the attentive escort while scanning the crowd for me. They didn't have to look long. I walked straight toward them, the manila envelope tucked under my arm like a weapon. Lila! Evan! I called out, my voice carrying over the carnival noise. Just the people I wanted to see. The crowd around us began to notice the tension immediately. Small towns thrive on drama, and the sight of a husband approaching his wife and her lover at a public festival was too juicy to ignore. Conversations died mid-sentence as people turned to watch our little soap opera unfold. Lila stepped forward, her chin raised in defiance. Garrett, don't you dare make a scene. Not here, not in front of everyone. A scene? I laughed, the sound echoing off the nearby carnival booths. Sweetheart, the scene started when you decided to parade your boyfriend around town while lying to everyone about working late. Evan moved to Lila's side, trying to look protective and authoritative. "That's enough, Garrett. You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I opened the envelope and pulled out the first photograph, a clear shot of Lila and Evan entering the seaside inn together, timestamp showing 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when she'd told me she was in client meetings. Because I think embarrassment is relative. A gasp rippled through the growing crowd. I recognized faces from around town. The postmaster, several shop owners, parents from the local school. The kind of people who would spread this story to every corner of our small community within hours. "You had me followed?" Lila's voice cracked with outrage. "That's harassment. That's evidence," I interrupted, pulling out more photos. "Evidence of adultery, fraud, and conspiracy. Should I go through them one by one, or would you prefer the highlight reel?" Evan tried to grab the photos, but I stepped back smoothly. Years of working on the docks had given me good reflexes and better balance than his gym-toned muscles could match. "This is crazy," Evan said, looking around at the crowd as if appealing for support. "The man's having a breakdown. He can't accept that his wife doesn't love him anymore." "You're right," I agreed, surprising him. "I can't accept it. Mostly because she's been telling me she loves me every night while texting you about how pathetic I am. It's the mixed messages that really confuse a guy." I pulled out my phone and activated the speaker, playing one of the voice recordings Cap had captured. Lila's voice clear and unmistakable. "Garrett actually thinks I'm working late on the Morrison account. He's so gullible it's almost sad. I told him I love him this morning, and the idiot believed it." Evan's laughter from the recording was like a slap across every face in the crowd. Several women made disgusted sounds. A man near the back called out, "That's cold, lady." Lila's face had gone white, then red, then white again. "You recorded private conversations? That's illegal." "Actually, it's not," I replied. "Massachusetts is a two-party consent state, but this was recorded in a public place where you had no reasonable expectation of privacy. I checked with a lawyer." That was a lie. I'd checked with Cap, who'd checked with his lawyer friend, but it sounded authoritative enough to shut down her legal objections. Evan was looking increasingly desperate. "Look, everyone makes mistakes. Lila and we fell in love. It happens. That doesn't give him the right to—" "To what?" I interrupted. "To show people who you really are? Speaking of which," I pulled out the employment records Cap had obtained. "Did you know your boyfriend here has been fired from 2 previous jobs for harassment? Or that he's currently under investigation for expense account fraud? Really knows how to pick them, doesn't you, Lila?" Evan lunged forward, trying to grab the papers, but I'd expected that. I sidestepped and let his momentum carry him past me. Unfortunately for him, his designer shoes weren't made for sudden direction changes on wet boardwalk planks. He slipped, arms windmilling wildly, and crashed backward into the dunk tank setup for the volunteer fire department's fundraiser. The splash was spectacular. The crowd's laughter was even better. Evan surfaced, sputtering and furious, his carefully styled hair plastered to his skull and his expensive shirt clinging to his body like a wet rag. The fire chief, who'd been running the booth, looked between Evan and me with barely concealed amusement. "That'll be $5, the fire chief said. "Same as everyone else who dunks someone." I handed him a 20. "Keep the change. It was worth every penny." Cell phones were coming out now, people recording video and taking pictures. In the age of social media, Evan's impromptu swim would be viral within hours. I could already see teenagers posting to their Instagram stories, adding laughing, crying emojis and sarcastic captions. Lila tried to help Evan out of the tank, but he was too heavy and too angry to cooperate gracefully. They both nearly fell back in, which only made the crowd laugh harder. "This isn't over," Lila hissed at me as Evan finally climbed out, water streaming from his clothes. "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "It's not." I held up the rest of the envelope's contents, still thick with documents they hadn't seen yet. "Monday morning, Evan. You'll be meeting your new supervisor on the industrial waste account. Congratulations on your transfer, by the way. I hear septic tank maintenance is a growing field." Evan's face went even whiter than his waterlogged shirt. "How did you know about your reassignment? Let's just say HR departments take anonymous tips about employee misconduct very seriously, especially when those tips come with documentation." Lila grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin through my jacket. "Stop this. Right now. You've made your point." I looked down at her hand, then back at her face. Have I? Because my point was supposed to be that actions have consequences, that betraying people who trust you comes with a price, that thinking you're smarter than everyone else usually proves you're not. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. "I don't think that point has been made yet. Not completely." The crowd was still watching, still recording, still whispering among themselves. I could see the story spreading in real time. People texting friends, calling family members, sharing videos. By tomorrow, everyone in town would know exactly what kind of people Lila and Evan really were. But I had one more card to play. The biggest one. "There's something else you should all know," I announced, raising my voice to address the entire crowd. Something about what these two were really planning. I pulled out the final set of documents, printouts of text messages and emails that Cap had obtained through his investigation. They didn't just want to have an affair. They wanted to destroy my reputation, my career, my life. They planned to frame me for harassment, sabotage my job, and steal money from our joint accounts to fund their relationship. The crowd's murmur turned darker, more hostile. Adultery was one thing. People could understand passion and poor choices. But systematic destruction of an innocent person crossed a different line entirely. "Show them the texts," someone called out. I recognized the voice. Mrs. Henderson from our building, who'd been at the disastrous game night. I held up one particularly damning exchange where Lila and Evan discussed planting evidence in my work locker to make it look like I was stealing from the marina. Another, where they planned to have Lila file a false police report claiming I'd threatened her. "They wanted to put me in jail," I said simply. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I was inconvenient to their plans. The crowd's mood shifted completely. What had started as entertainment, watching a cheating wife get exposed, had become something uglier and more serious. People were looking at Lila and Evan with genuine disgust now, not just disapproval. Evan tried one last desperate play. "He's lying. Those are fake. He made all of this up because he can't handle losing." "Really?" I pulled out my phone again and played another recording. This time it was Evan's voice, discussing the harassment frame-up in detail, including which of Lila's female colleagues they could convince to provide false testimony. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the carnival music seemed to fade into the background. Lila broke first. I can't do this anymore." She turned and ran, pushing through the crowd toward the parking area. Her designer heels clicked frantically on the boardwalk planks as she fled, leaving Evan standing alone in his soaked clothes, facing a crowd of hostile neighbors. Evan looked around desperately, perhaps hoping for some support or sympathy. He found none. The fire chief was actively scowling at him. Mrs. Henderson was shaking her head in disgust. Even the teenagers had stopped laughing and were looking at him with contempt. "This is all lies," Evan said weakly. He's obsessed. Unstable." "Then why don't you call the police?" I suggested. "Report me for harassment. I'm sure they'd be very interested in seeing all the evidence I've collected." Evan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. We both knew he couldn't involve the authorities without exposing himself to criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy. Finally, he too turned and ran, water still dripping from his clothes as he disappeared into the crowd. I stood alone in the center of the circle that had formed around us, holding the envelope that had just destroyed 2 lives. The crowd began to disperse slowly, people breaking into small groups to discuss what they'd witnessed. Jules appeared at my elbow, having closed his bar early to watch the show. "Well," he said, "that was something." "Something," I agreed. "Buy you a drink? Seems like you've earned it." I looked around at the festival continuing around us, families enjoying the evening, couples holding hands as they walked along the waterfront. Normal people living normal lives, not scheming to destroy each other for personal gain. "Yeah," I said, "I think I have." Monday morning brought rain and reckoning in equal measure. I arrived at the marina early, as always, but found myself unable to concentrate on the usual tasks of managing boat slips and coordinating maintenance schedules. The weekend's events had left me feeling strangely empty, like a balloon with all the air let out. The festival confrontation should have been the end of it. Lila and Evan were professionally and socially ruined. Their reputations in town were destroyed beyond repair. Justice, by any reasonable measure, had been served. So why did I feel like the story wasn't finished? The answer came at 10 a.m. when Cap showed up at my office, his weathered face grim with concern. "We've got a problem," he said, closing the door behind him. "Your wife and her boyfriend aren't taking their defeat gracefully." He handed me a manila folder. Seemed like my life was being measured in manila folders these days. Inside were photographs taken with a telephoto lens, showing Lila and Evan meeting with a man I didn't recognize at a coffee shop in the next town over. "Who's the third party?" I asked. "Private investigator named Russell Webb. Not one of the good ones, if you catch my meaning. The kind who specializes in manufacturing evidence and intimidating witnesses." My stomach clenched. They're fighting back. Worse than that, they're planning a counterattack. My source says they're trying to build a case that you've been stalking and harassing them. Webb's job is to create evidence that you've been unstable and threatening. I studied the photographs more carefully. Lila looked different. Harder somehow, her usual polished appearance replaced by something more desperate and dangerous. Evan had traded his designer clothes for a cheaper outfit, probably trying to look like a victim rather than a predator. "What kind of evidence?" I asked. Cap pulled out another set of photos. "Staged scenes. Webb's been following you around, taking pictures that could be interpreted as stalking behavior. He's got shots of you near Lila's office building, outside the coffee shop where she meets friends, even at the grocery store she frequents." "But I work downtown. I shop at that grocery store. These are all normal activities." "You know that, I know that, but a jury might see something different if these photos are presented the right way, especially if they're accompanied by testimony from Lila claiming you've been threatening her." I felt the familiar anger rising in my chest, but this time it was mixed with something else. Fear. Not for my physical safety, but for my freedom. If Lila and Evan could convince a judge that I was dangerous, they could get a restraining order. Maybe even have me arrested. "There's more," Cap continued. "Webb's been asking questions around town trying to find people who'll say negative things about you, offering money for information about your mental state, your drinking habits, your history of violence." I don't have a history of violence. I know that. But Webb's good at his job, and his job is making innocent people look guilty. He's already got 2 people willing to testify that you've been acting strangely lately. "Who?" Cap consulted his notes. "Monica, for one. Apparently she's decided that cooperating with Lila's counterattack is better for her career than sticking with the truth." That stung. I'd thought Monica understood that Lila had betrayed her too, but apparently self-preservation trumped solidarity. "And the second?" "Evan's ex-girlfriend, Carrie. She's willing to say you approached her asking questions about Evan, made her feel uncomfortable and threatened." I remembered the conversation. I'd bumped into Carrie at a coffee shop and made casual small talk, during which she'd volunteered that Evan was bad news and had cheated on her repeatedly. The interaction had lasted maybe 5 minutes and had been entirely pleasant, but in Webb's hands, it would become evidence of stalking and intimidation. "So, what's their endgame?" I asked. "Best case scenario for them? They get you arrested on harassment charges, maybe get a restraining order that makes you look like the dangerous one. Worst case? They're hoping you'll do something stupid that gives them real ammunition. I set the folder aside and leaned back in my chair, thinking. Lila and Evan had underestimated me once, leading to their public humiliation. Now they were making the opposite mistake, overestimating their ability to manipulate the legal system. They want me to do something stupid, I said slowly. Something that makes me look like the unstable ex-husband who can't let go. Exactly. Webb's probably hoping you'll confront them directly, maybe lose your temper and give him something to work with. I smiled for the first time since Cap had arrived. Then let's give them what they want. Cap raised an eyebrow. Come again? They want a confrontation. They want me to look unstable and threatening. So let's arrange a meeting where I can be both of those things, but on my terms, not theirs. I pulled out my phone and started typing a text message to Lila. We need to talk. Tonight, 8 p.m., the old pier behind the fish processing plant. Come alone, or don't come at all. Cap watched me send the message, his expression skeptical. That sounds exactly like what a dangerous stalker would write. That's the point. They'll bring Webb to record everything, thinking they're walking into a trap where I'll incriminate myself. Instead, they're walking into a trap where they'll incriminate themselves. I explained my plan while Cap listened, his skepticism gradually transforming into grudging admiration. It's risky, he said when I finished. If any part of this goes wrong, you'll be the one in handcuffs. If I do nothing, I'll be in handcuffs anyway. At least, this way, I control the narrative. The rest of the day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I went through the motions of work, while my mind raced through contingencies and backup plans. Everything depended on Lila and Evan reacting predictably, and after 3 months of studying their behavior, I was confident they would. At 7:30 p.m., I drove to the old pier, a decrepit structure that had once served the town's fishing industry, but now stood abandoned except for the occasional teenager looking for a place to drink beer and make out. The location was perfect for my purposes, isolated enough to seem threatening, but public enough that Webb could position himself nearby with a camera. I parked my truck in plain sight and walked out onto the pier, my footsteps echoing on the weathered planks. The harbor spread out before me, dark water reflecting the lights from town. In the distance, I could see the boardwalk where I'd humiliated Lila and Evan just 3 days earlier. At exactly 8 p.m., a car pulled into the parking area. Lila got out first, followed by Evan. They approached the pier cautiously, clearly nervous about meeting me in such an isolated location. Perfect. Their nervousness would read as reasonable caution on Webb's recording. "Garrett," Lila called out when they were still 20 feet away. "We're here. What do you want?" I turned to face them, making sure to keep my body language loose and non-threatening despite the anger burning in my chest. "I want to make a deal," I said. They moved closer, Evan staying slightly behind Lila as if using her as a human shield. "What kind of deal?" Lila asked. "The kind where we all walk away from this mess without anyone going to jail." Evan stepped forward, some of his confidence returning. "You're the only one who should be worried about jail, Garrett. What you did at the festival was harassment. What you're doing now, luring us to isolated locations, is stalking." I nodded agreeably. "You're probably right. I'm sure the police would be very interested in my behavior lately, just like they'd be interested in yours." I pulled out my phone and held it up so they could see the screen. On it was a video file labeled Insurance Policy. "What is that?" Lila demanded. "Security footage from the marina's parking lot, from last Tuesday night around 11 p.m. Want to guess what it shows?" Their faces went pale. I could see them trying to remember what they'd done that night, what evidence they might have left behind. "It shows you, Lila, using your key to get into the marina office after hours. It shows you planting something in my desk drawer, something that looks suspiciously like the petty cash that went missing from the office safe." That was a bluff. There was no missing petty cash, and no security footage of Lila planting evidence. But their guilty reactions told me I'd guessed correctly about their plan. "That's impossible," Evan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Because I've got the whole thing on video. You planning the frame-up, Lila executing it, both of you celebrating afterward, conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, perjury. That's serious prison time." I was laying it on thick, but they were too panicked to think clearly. The same arrogance that had led them to underestimate me initially was now making them overestimate how much evidence I actually had. "You're bluffing," Lila said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Am I? Want to test that theory? Because I'm pretty sure your new private investigator friend is recording this conversation right now, hoping to catch me making threats. Should we give him something interesting to listen to?" I raised my voice slightly, addressing the darkness beyond the pier where I was certain Webb was hiding with his equipment. "Mr. Webb, I know you're out there. I hope you're getting all of this because I want there to be a clear record of what I'm about to offer." Silence from the shadows, but I could feel eyes watching us. "Here's the deal," I continued, looking back at Lila and Evan. "You drop whatever scheme you're cooking up with Webb. You leave town, permanently, and I'll consider not turning my evidence over to the district attorney's office." "You can't make us leave town," Evan protested. "Can't I? Let's see. You're unemployed as of today. I heard your new boss wasn't impressed with your first day on the waste management account. Lila's been fired from her job and blacklisted from every PR firm within 50 miles. You're both facing potential criminal charges and civil lawsuits from the people you've wronged." I spread my hands in a gesture of mock sympathy. "Seems to me like a fresh start somewhere else might be your best option." They exchanged glances, silently communicating in the way that couples do. I could see them weighing their options, calculating odds, trying to find an angle that would let them win. "And if we refuse?" Lila asked. "Then tomorrow morning I hand everything over to the police and let the chips fall where they may. The security footage, the financial records, the documentation of your conspiracy to frame me, all of it. Plus, I'll make sure everyone in town knows that you hired a sleazy private investigator to manufacture evidence against me." I pulled out a second phone, Cap's burner device, which had been recording our entire conversation. "Speaking of evidence, Mr. Webb, I hope you realize that recording people without their consent is illegal in Massachusetts. The penalties include both criminal charges and civil liability. Might want to consider whether your clients are worth that kind of risk." A figure emerged from behind a nearby building, a thin man in his 50s with the kind of face that suggested he'd made a career of other people's misery. He held a small recording device in one hand and a camera in the other. "This is entrapment," Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, this is justice," I replied. "Entrapment is when law enforcement induces someone to commit a crime they wouldn't otherwise commit. I'm just a private citizen defending himself against people who want to destroy his life for their own benefit." Webb looked at Lila and Evan, clearly calculating whether they were worth the legal trouble he was suddenly facing. "My advice?" I continued. "Delete whatever recordings you've made tonight and find yourself some new clients. These two are about to become very expensive liabilities." Webb muttered something under his breath, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as he'd emerged. Lila and Evan stood alone on the pier, looking like children who'd been caught stealing candy. "You have 48 hours, I told them. "Pack your things, close your accounts, and get out of town. If I see either of you after Wednesday night, all deals are off and everything goes to the police." "This is blackmail," Lila said weakly. "No, this is consequences. Something you've both been avoiding for too long." I walked past them toward my truck, then paused and looked back. "If I could turn back time," I said, echoing Lila's words from that disastrous game night, "I'd never have wasted 7 years of my life on someone who didn't deserve them. But I can't turn back time. All I can do is make sure the future is better than the past." I drove away, leaving them standing on the pier in the darkness, finally understanding that they'd lost more than just a game. They'd lost everything. Epilogue. New beginnings. Wednesday evening found me sitting at Murphy's Tavern, nursing a whiskey and watching the sun set over the harbor. Jules was polishing glasses behind the bar, humming an old country song about revenge being sweeter than wine. "They're gone," Cap said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Saw them loading a U-Haul this morning. Lila looked like she'd been crying for a week." I nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor regret, just a kind of hollow completion, like finishing a book I'd never wanted to read in the first place. "Any word on where they're headed?" "Florida, from what I heard. Seems fitting, land of second chances and fresh starts." Jules brought Cap a beer without being asked. The old bartender had been following our drama with the fascination of someone who'd seen every kind of human folly but still found new variations interesting. "So what now?" Jules asked. "You going to stay in town, or are you thinking about a fresh start too?" I considered the question. The marina job was secure. My boss had actually given me a raise after learning how I'd handled the situation with Lila and Evan. The town's opinion of me had shifted from sympathy to respect, with several people commenting on how I'd kept my cool under pressure. But staying meant living with the memories, walking past places where Lila and I had been happy before everything went wrong. It meant being known forever as the guy whose wife cheated on him, even if I'd gotten my revenge. "I think I'll stick around," I said finally. "This is home. I'm not going to let them drive me away from it." Cap raised his beer in a toast. "To staying put and standing your ground." I clinked my whiskey glass against his bottle. "To consequences, catching up with people who think they're too smart to face them." As we drank, I thought about the last 7 years and the lessons they'd taught me. Trust carefully. Watch for warning signs. Don't let other people's opinions of you matter more than your own opinion of yourself. And if someone decides to play games with your life, make sure you're better at playing games than they are. Outside, the harbor lights began to twinkle as darkness fell over the water. Somewhere out there, boats were coming home to safe harbor after a day of honest work. Tomorrow, I'd be here to help them dock, to maintain their slips, to keep the small machinery of daily life running smoothly. It wasn't a glamorous existence, but it was mine. And after everything that had happened, that felt like enough. Jules turned up the music, and the tavern filled with the sound of old songs about love and loss and starting over. I finished my whiskey, left money on the table, and walked out into the night air. The future stretched ahead of me like an uncharted harbor, full of possibilities, some good and some bad, but all of them mine to navigate. For the first time in months, that felt like exactly where I wanted to be.